My name is Ian Malik, I'm 23 years old, and my life has always been ordinary. Not dull, not miserable, just steady. Predictable. Like a clock that never misses a second. Most mornings start the same. The faint aroma of coffee drifts through my small kitchen, filling the air before I even take my first sip. The machine hums, steady and low, a kind of background music to my mornings. I stand by the counter, watching steam curl upward like little ghosts, listening to the faint creak of pipes behind the walls. Outside, through my kitchen window, I can hear the city beginning to stir, the distant rumble of motorbikes, the shuffle of neighbors leaving for work, a car horn echoing 2 streets away. Sometimes, the postman's hurried footsteps climb the stairwell, then vanish again, leaving silence in their place. By 9 a.m., I'm usually at my desk. My laptop glows faintly in the dim light of my apartment. The desk itself is plain, scratches along the wood, papers stacked in uneven piles, pens scattered as if they had minds of their own. I work as a part-time research assistant for a local firm. Nothing glamorous, nothing anyone would write home about. Mostly spreadsheets, endless tabs, and the soft tap of keys beneath my fingers. My phone doesn't ring much. My circle of friends has grown smaller over the years, reduced to the occasional message that pops up at the corner of my screen. And yet I don't complain. Solitude feels natural to me, almost like a companion I've gotten used to. By the afternoon, I sometimes step out into the garage below my apartment building. Old tools hang from hooks on the wall, rusted screwdrivers, a forgotten hammer, a box of nails my landlord never touched. When the sun hits the metal, it warms the air, and the smell of grease and dust fills my lungs. I don't build much of anything there, but I like the sound of the space, the echo of my footsteps on the concrete, the distant buzz of life outside muffled by the heavy garage door. Evenings are quieter still. I heat up simple meals, rice, chicken, sometimes just bread and tea, then return to my laptop. The glow of the screen fills the room as the hours slip away. The city outside dims, one light at a time, until all I hear are faint voices drifting through the walls, a dog barking 2 buildings away, or the occasional rush of wind against the glass. And that's my life. Simple. Predictable. Quiet. It's not that I'm unhappy. It's just still. Like standing in the middle of a room where nothing ever changes, the same walls, the same air, the same silence wrapping around me every night. But what I didn't know, in those ordinary days, was how quickly silence can shatter. How one unexpected voice could cut through the routine I thought I'd built forever. Because storms don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like a memory knocking at the door. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that feels no different from any other. My laptop glowed faintly on the desk, spreadsheets open but untouched, while the coffee beside me had already gone cold. The building was unusually quiet, no footsteps on the stairs, no doors creaking open or shut. Just the hum of the fan overhead, and the steady rhythm of my breathing. And then, 3 soft knocks at my door. I froze. Nobody ever came by unannounced. For a moment I wondered if I had imagined it. But then the sound came again, firmer this time. When I opened the door, the hallway light flickered, and there she was. Sarah. Her name fell silently into my mind, like a stone dropping into still water. The same Sarah who had once tutored me years ago, sitting patiently at library tables while I stumbled through essays. She looked older now, though not by much, but her eyes told a different story. They were tired, shadowed in a way I had never seen before. She smiled, but it was faint, hesitant, the kind of smile someone wears when they're not sure if they're welcome. "Hi, Ian," she said, her voice soft, carrying a tremor. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, hands still on the doorframe, my chest tightening with the weight of old memories. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." She entered slowly, like someone stepping into water they weren't sure was safe. Her movements were careful, almost fragile. She set her bag down by the chair, her fingers brushing against the worn fabric as if she needed to hold on to something steady. We sat across from each other, my small apartment suddenly feeling even smaller. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, filling the silence between us. I noticed how her hands fidgeted in her lap, her nails short and uneven, as though she had been biting them from worry. "I didn't mean to drop by like this," she began, her gaze shifting to the floor. It's been a long time. And She stopped, swallowing hard, as if the words weighed more than she could carry. Her eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw something unspoken. Loneliness. Fatigue. A kind of quiet desperation that she was trying so hard to hide. She laughed softly, though it didn't sound like joy. "Do you remember when I used to tutor you? You hated poetry back then." The memory made me smile. But the way she said it, like she was reaching for something familiar, something safe, made me realize this wasn't just a casual visit. Sarah wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here because something inside her had led her back. In that moment, my apartment no longer felt like the quiet space I had always known. Her presence carried weight, like a storm cloud pressing against the air, waiting to break. And deep down, I knew, whatever story she carried, it was about to change mine. Sarah sat on the edge of the chair, her posture straight but her shoulders heavy, as though the weight she carried refused to let her sink into comfort. I offered her coffee. It was the only thing I had to give without hesitation. She nodded, and I moved to the kitchen, the familiar hiss of the kettle filling the silence between us. From the corner of my eye, I noticed her looking around my apartment. Her gaze lingered on the stack of books by the window, the lone jacket draped over the chair, the half-finished notes scattered across the desk. I wondered what she saw, my solitude, my lack of color? Or maybe just the quietness that defined me. When I returned, I set the cup in front of her. Her fingers brushed against mine as she reached for it. They were cold, trembling just slightly, like someone who had been holding on too tightly for too long. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice carried a kind of fragility that made me want to protect it. We sat there, facing each other with steaming cups between us, yet neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was thick, charged, like the room itself was holding its breath. She traced the rim of her mug with her fingertip, her eyes lowered. I found myself watching her hands more than I should have, the way they moved nervously, as if they were trying to hide a story her lips couldn't yet tell. Finally, she broke the silence. "It feels strange, being here again. With you." I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah. Strange, but not bad." She smiled faintly at that, and for the first time, her face softened. The tension around her eyes eased just a little. We didn't dive into memories or explanations. Instead, the conversation tiptoed around small things. She asked about my work, my days, the books I'd been reading. I asked about hers, though her answers were brief, her words careful. Each pause in her voice felt like a door she wasn't ready to open. At one point, the lamp on my desk flickered, the bulb threatening to give out. Without thinking, I stood and tapped it lightly, the glow steadying again. She watched me, her lips curving into a real smile this time. "Still fixing things the simple way," she teased softly. Her laugh, short, quiet, but genuine, shifted the air between us. For a moment, it felt like the years hadn't passed at all. When silence returned, it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like something shared, something alive. Our eyes met across the table, lingering a second longer than they should have, until we both looked away, pretending not to notice. It wasn't a grand moment. No declarations, no revelations. Just coffee growing cold between us, hands that trembled, and eyes that refused to let go too quickly. But in that quiet, I knew, the connection wasn't beginning again. It had never really left. The first visit felt unexpected. The second felt coincidental. But by the third, neither of us pretended it was chance anymore. Sarah began stopping by in the evenings. Sometimes she'd text first, other times she'd simply knock, her voice carrying softly through the hallway. "Are you home?" And every time I was. At first, the rhythm of our meetings seemed casual, just coffee, light conversation, the kind of catch-ups two old acquaintances might share. But then the hours stretched. Conversations that began with books or work drifted into heavier things, memories, regrets, pieces of ourselves we hadn't shown anyone in a long time. She told me about her childhood home, the one that never quite felt safe, the nights she used to stay up reading under a flashlight just to drown out the noise. She laughed when she admitted she'd wanted to be a painter once, before life pulled her in another direction. I told her about my fear of being invisible, how I often felt like life passed me by while I stood still, a bystander in my own story. She listened, not the way people usually do, nodding absently, but really listened, her eyes steady, her silence warm. Sometimes, we didn't even need words. There were evenings when she'd sit by the window, staring out at the streetlights while I worked quietly at my desk. The room would be filled with nothing but the scratch of my pen, the faint hum of the city outside, and the steady rhythm of our breathing. But the silence was never empty. It was alive, carrying something unspoken between us. Her presence began to weave into my routine, like threads slipping into fabric. I found myself buying extra tea without thinking, clearing the chair by my desk instinctively, making space for her in a life that had never made space for anyone. And she, in her own way, seemed to settle into the smallness of my world. She'd hum absent-mindedly while flipping through my books, trace her fingers along the shelves as though mapping out my thoughts. Sometimes she'd laugh at the way I lined up my pens too neatly, nudging one out of place just to tease me. Yet beneath the lightness, there was always something fragile in her. Some nights, her eyes would glaze over mid-sentence, her smile faltering as though shadows had caught up to her. She never explained, not fully, but she didn't need to. The weight she carried revealed itself in the small pauses, in the way her hands stilled when silence grew too long. And I never asked her to explain. I simply stayed, offering presence instead of answers, listening instead of prying. With each visit, something rare was forming. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of bond that grew quietly, like roots deepening underground. Unseen, but undeniable. And though we never said it aloud, we both knew this wasn't just about old memories anymore. Something new was taking shape in the spaces between us, something we didn't yet dare to name. It was a Thursday evening when the storm broke, not outside, but between us. Sarah had come over later than usual. Her steps down the hallway were heavier, her knock softer, almost reluctant. When I opened the door, she forced a smile, but her eyes gave her away. They were swollen, rimmed with red, like she'd been carrying tears all day and had only just managed to hold them back. She sat at the table without a word, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles turned white. I poured her tea, placed it in front of her, and waited. Finally she spoke. "It's my family." Her voice was low, almost breaking. They wouldn't understand this." She gestured vaguely between us, as though naming it would make it too real. I froze. I knew what she meant, though she never said the words. To them, she was the responsible one, the older daughter who carried everyone else's weight. I was younger, still finding my footing, and in their eyes maybe still the boy she once tutored. What would they see in me? A distraction? A mistake? She shook her head, covering her face with her hands. They think I should be stronger. That I shouldn't need anyone. And if they knew I came here, if they knew I came to you. Her voice trailed off into silence. The words hit me harder than I expected. Because as much as I wanted to reach across the table, to tell her none of that mattered, a small part of me knew she was right. Our bond was fragile, still unspoken, still undefined, and the world outside this apartment would not handle it with care. "I don't care what they think," I said, though my voice wasn't as steady as I wanted it to be. "You don't have to explain yourself to anyone." She looked up at me then, her eyes glistening. "Don't you see, Ian? That's easy for you to say. But for me, it's not that simple." Her words lingered in the air, sharper than silence. And it wasn't just her family. There were other shadows too, ones she hadn't said outright, but I had begun to sense. The ghost of someone before me. An ex who still lingered in her memory, who had left scars she never admitted out loud. The way she flinched when her phone buzzed late at night. The way she'd grow quiet at the mention of certain names. I wanted to be her refuge, her safe place. But I also feared I was asking her to choose between the life she carried on her shoulders and the fragile, dangerous thing forming between us. That night, after she left, I sat alone at the table where her tea still sat untouched, the steam long gone. My chest ached with the pull of two truths, that I wanted her here more than anything. And that wanting her might be the very thing that could break us both. The night it happened, the rain hadn't stopped for hours. It pressed against the windows, steady and relentless, filling the room with a muted rhythm. Sarah sat across from me, her posture tight, her eyes fixed on the steam rising from her untouched tea. Neither of us had spoken much that evening. Our conversations, once effortless, had grown hesitant, like we were circling around something too fragile to name. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but unbearably heavy, each second pulling us closer to a truth we both had been avoiding. Her hand trembled as she lifted her cup, then set it back down without drinking. The faint clink of porcelain against wood sounded louder than it should have. She exhaled, long and unsteady, her shoulders sinking as though she had finally stopped pretending to be strong. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word, barely holding itself together. My chest tightened. "Doing what?" She looked up at me then, and her eyes, dark, glistening, held the storm she'd been hiding. "Pretending. Pretending I come here just to talk. Pretending I don't feel what I feel when I'm with you." The words hung between us, sharp and trembling. My pulse thundered in my ears. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Her hand shifted on the table, fingers brushing against the surface like she was searching for something steady. Without thinking, I reached out. My hand found hers, warm and shaking. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, her grip tightened, desperate, as though she had been waiting for that touch far longer than she'd admit. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady now, raw with honesty. "I tell myself it's wrong. That I should know better, that my family would never understand, that I don't deserve to feel this again. But every time I leave this place, I want to come back. Every time I try to quiet it, it gets louder. And I..." Her voice broke, and she pressed her free hand to her mouth, her body trembling. "I can't pretend anymore, Ian." The silence that followed was deafening. Rain hammered harder against the window, thunder rolled distantly, but inside the room, it was only us, two people caught in the weight of words that couldn't be unsaid. I leaned forward, my own voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, I've felt it too. Since the first night you knocked on my door." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, her eyes closed as though bracing herself. Then she opened them, and in them I saw not just fear, but release, like someone finally setting down a burden they'd carried for years. We stayed like that, hands clasped across the table, words exhausted, silence speaking louder than anything else. The storm outside raged on, but between us, something fragile had broken open, and in its place, something undeniable had begun. The storm eased by dawn. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the sky outside my window carried that gray, fragile light that only comes after a long night. Sarah was still there, sitting across from me, her hand still in mine. Neither of us had slept, but neither of us looked away. The silence had shifted, no longer heavy, no longer suffocating. It was softer now, almost sacred, like the world outside had quieted just so we could breathe. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, stripped of all the weight she usually carried. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight every expectation, every voice telling me this is wrong." She paused, squeezing my hand. "But I know I don't want to let this go." I nodded, my throat tight. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight. Maybe it's enough to just not pretend anymore." Her lips curved into a smile, small, tired, but real. The kind of smile that carried hope inside it, fragile but alive. We didn't rush anything. There was no dramatic declaration, no sweeping gesture. Just the quiet truth of two people sitting in a room, choosing each other in the smallest, simplest way. As the sky lightened, I walked her to the door. The hallway was silent, the air still damp with rain. She turned to me, her hair falling loose around her face, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. For a moment, we just stood there, suspended in that fragile space between goodbye and something more. And then, slowly, she leaned forward. Our lips met, not urgent, not desperate, but careful. A first kiss that felt like a question and an answer all at once. Warm, trembling, unsteady, but real. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine, her breath uneven. "This doesn't feel like an ending," she whispered. "No," I said, closing my eyes, letting the truth settle between us. "It feels like the beginning." She left soon after, her footsteps fading down the stairwell. I stood in the doorway long after she was gone, the morning light spilling into my apartment, painting everything gold. That day, my routine felt different. The coffee still brewed, the laptop still glowed, the city still moved outside, but there was something new woven into it all. A presence. A possibility. It wasn't a perfect ending. Her family still weighed on her shoulders. The past still lingered in her eyes. And my fears, the quiet doubt that I might not be enough, still whispered in the back of my mind. But when I thought of her smile, of her hand trembling in mine, of the kiss we had finally let happen, I knew this wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty. About beginning. And sometimes beginnings are more powerful than endings ever could be.